For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to The Gist on Strat News Global. Hi, I'm Surya Gangadharan and welcome to another edition of The Gist. Today our focus is on the Philippines, notably the election of Ferdinand Marcos as President of the Philippines. Important to note the following points. The Philippines is rarely on India's radar. That changed recently when the Philippines bought India's BrahMos missile for coastal use. India is eyeing more sales, perhaps even joint ventures in defense projects. But much will depend on how President Marcos sees this. And it's not clear how he sees India. He is also believed to be close to China. Joining me from Manila is Charmaine Willoughby. She's Associate Professor of International Studies at Salle University in Manila. Charmaine, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Charmaine, I understand Marcos has been in public office for some time. So, what is his reputation? What does he stand for? What does he believe in? What is his standing?
President-elect Ferdinand Marcos is actually the son of the dictator and the namesake of the president who ruled the Philippines in the 1960s until his ouster in 1986 during the People Power Revolution. Marcos Jr., or Bongbong as he is frequently called in the Philippines, he used to be the vice governor of the province of Ilocos in the 1980s. He was elected unopposed during the height of his father's regime. And then afterwards, he became, from vice governor, he became governor. And when his family returned from exile, he was thereafter a member of Congress and then a senator. He ran for vice president in 2016, but he lost to Vice President Robredo, with whom he is running against for the presidency in this round of the elections. Apart from holding public office, there are also a couple of civil cases involving the recovery of the Marcos family's ill-gotten wealth, and Bongbong Marcos was a defendant in at least 3 of those cases. The Philippine government has so far reclaimed a portion of the ill-gotten wealth, and this was used to compensate victims of human rights abuses during the martial law era. A sizable amount has yet to be recovered, and Marcos claims that he never possessed or even benefited from ill-gotten wealth.
So, does he come across as somebody who is out to redeem his father's legacy? Does he speak frequently about it?
Definitely. The entire campaign was actually built on restoring the name and the image of the family. In fact, the campaign depended on this very vast information ecosystem that tapped into social media networks like Facebook or Twitter, YouTube, and even TikTok. The narrative of all of these social media posts was that the martial law era during his father's regime was the golden age of the Philippines. This despite the notorious human rights violations during that time. So there is a reason to believe that he will continue what his father has started, and even his campaign slogan in Filipino, it's called Babangon Muli, which literally means to rise up or to get back on one's feet. It now is interpreted as rising from the decay that the country has suffered when it was not under the family.
So he has a strong sense of where he comes from. So is he close to China? Let's come to that big question. Is he close to China?
He does have a very close relationship with China. In fact, when he announced his candidacy for the presidency in October 2021, he did meet with the Chinese ambassador to the Philippines. And then last week, he had a quote unquote, very substantial phone conversation with President Xi Jinping, where they talked about shifting the Philippine-China relationship to a higher gear. China said during this phone conversation that it would continue to support the Philippines' independent foreign policy. President Xi's preference to talk again in private is indicative of the likelihood to continue talks at the bilateral level rather than at the multilateral level. And this could be detrimental to leveraging and enforcing the 2016 arbitration award in favor of the Philippines.
Mhm. So, are the Chinese funding him? Did they fund his campaign?
There have been no information about that, but what we can gauge is that there is really this moral support or ambiguous support of what he is what his rationale is and what he believes in.
So, how does this? I mean, I want to ask about. I mentioned earlier that the Philippines has hardly been on India's radar. I presume it also applies in the reverse. What is the perception of India and the Philippines? What does Bongbong Marcos bring to it?
I think what's important to remember here is that at the core of President-elect Marcos's campaign, and presumably his presidency as well, is this idea of restoring the family's name and image, and solidifying or cementing the family's role in the Philippines and in the world. So you're absolutely right. India and the Philippines have never been really close, but there are aspects to our relationship that need to continue, such as, for instance, in digital economy, and in particular today in regard to health security, in light of ongoing pandemic recovery efforts. A lot of the relationship between India and the Philippines would also largely depend a lot on geopolitical dynamics, on the U.S.-China competition, on how the Quad will actually, take form, and what kinds of activities would be under the Quad framework, as well as Europe and other countries turn to the Indo-Pacific. All of these arrangements converge on China or on the need to contain China. So these are things that we need to watch out for. In regard to the Philippines, it's really just about restoring the family image and the name of Marcos.
Mhm. So I recall there was a item on Twitter about the Indian ambassador meeting the president-elect, and there was a reference to his seeking India's help in digital governance, etc. Is India's footprint in the Philippines, has it kind of increased since the agreement on the missile sales?
Yes, absolutely, and this especially played a more crucial role during the pandemic.
I see. So logically, one would presume that he would like this to continue.
Absolutely.
Okay. So is he and Duterte, are they very similar in their approach to China?
Yes, there have been a lot of reports recently that President-elect Marcos will largely be continuing the policies of President Duterte. So this is in regard to, number one, the pursuit of an independent foreign policy, also in regard to the war on drugs, although President-elect Marcos did say that it wouldn't be as notorious, as violent as President Duterte's war on drugs. But most importantly, the continuation, where we see the continuation, is in regard to the policy in the South China Sea. The similarities are that the 2016 arbitration award will be minimized, will not be used as leverage, as as most Filipinos would want to. There is a need to engage China in the economic aspect, and there is no need to provoke China even more.
Mhm. But I do recall that President Duterte's outreach to China was a little disappointing in terms of its economic dimension.
Yes, so at the onset of the Duterte administration in 2016, President Duterte did say that he was running for office to rid the country of criminality, of drugs, and so on. So his war on drugs was really very intense. And as the bodies piled up, we earned the ire, the criticism of Western countries, of the United States, of the European Union. As the criticisms mounted up, President Duterte needed an alternative backer, an alternative source of support, and China was very happy to do this. China was also very willing to lend support to Duterte's flagship Build, Build, Build program. This is the infrastructure program of the Duterte administration. However, 6 years after the administration, it's now become very clear that the Chinese support was not really very forthcoming. So we did not really see a lot of the projected investments that China poured into the Build, Build, Build program.
Mm-hmm. So then what explains this desire to continue on a policy that has not delivered returns? Is it,
Well,
why?
One thing that we should remember about Philippine politics or the Filipino psyche in general is that we're a pretty conservative country. We don't really want to see, we do want to see changes, but we are a little bit hesitant or have reservations on how much change we can embrace. So in the election of President Marcos, a lot of Filipinos really did see this as just a continuation of the last 6 years. And there is this belief that, well, we do need somebody strong, strongman politics, somebody who can really ensure that criminality, all of those negative elements in society can be harnessed so that we can pursue, a better quality life.
And has that been anywhere near being achieved during Duterte's time?
Well, it depends on whom you ask, which strata in society we are asking. The common folk would always say that they embrace the ideals of President Duterte because President Duterte has always projected himself as kind of like the ordinary folks. His popularity remained very high even towards the end of his administration.
Hmm. No, it's curious because you said that he is Bongbong Marcos is close to China, but on the ground there's a lot of opposition to China, isn't it?
Yes,
How
that's
how this?
something that's very
Yeah.
interesting because there's really a very strong anti-China sentiment on the ground. A couple of years ago, shortly before the pandemic started, I conducted, and along with a couple of colleagues, we conducted a study on Philippine perceptions about our partners. We conducted a survey and asked members of the Filipino strategic community. And interestingly, the study found that a lot of Filipinos really still prefer the traditional partners like the United States, Australia, Japan.
Mhm.
China is way down in the list, and Russia is also way down in the list. So this tells us that there is still that very strong anti-China sentiment. This is also largely because there's a lack of transparency of what China really wants to achieve. There have been a lot of discussions about the BRI and the debt trap that is part and parcel of being involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. So
Mhm.
yes, there's a very strong anti-China sentiment on the ground. So it's now going to be up to President-elect Marcos to balance the interests of the great powers, whether it's with China or the United States, and balance those against the interests of Filipinos on the ground.
Is has the Philippines signed on to the BRI?
As far as I know, not completely, and this is also why President Duterte was really interested in the investment opportunities that China wanted to give via his Build, Build, Build program.
Hmm. You think the president-elect could pursue that?
Well, certainly there are benefits that can be gained from continued or even intensified economic relations with China, but that aspect of the relationship really needs to be tempered with the sovereignty and territorial claims of the Philippines in the South China Sea.
Now, you mentioned that you will be balancing the external interests plus the sentiments within the country. Um, Given that there is so much domestic opposition to China, as a elected leader, shouldn't he respect that sentiment, or does he see a need to? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what the how does this
What
work?
Yes, this is precisely the challenge that President-elect Marcos now faces, because on one hand, he really would like to get the recognition that is due him, so that he can continue and to restore and solidify the Marcos family name in the Philippines and in the world. But at the same time, he also realizes that in order for him to continue to enjoy the support of a large number of Filipinos, he also needs to balance those interests with the man on the street. And there are a lot of talks going on right now in regard to who's going to be in his cabinet, who's going to run the finance department, who's going to be in these key positions. And it's still a little, some names are now being announced as to who would be the key members of the cabinet, but the official list will actually be by the end, towards the end of June, during his inauguration.
Mhm. Do you expect the China factor to play a role in his the relationship with India?
The China factor will continue to color the Philippines' relationship, I think, in particular with the United States. India would still pretty much be, kind of under the radar. Um, and that being the case, I still continue to believe that India and the Philippines should continue with the non-military aspects of their relationship.
Mhm. So, did the sale of military of missiles from India did that come as a surprise to the Philippines? Was it widely expected? I mean,
For members of the Philippine strategic community, this is actually a very good move for the Philippine military, because it is a function of the modernization program that the armed forces of the Philippines really needs to advance our interests, particularly in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. So, in that sense, this is a good move for the Philippines, but likewise, it demonstrates an intensity or a leveling up of the role that India wants to play in the Indo-Pacific. So I think this reflects very well, not just on the commitment and the motivation of the Philippines to push its own interests and advance its own interests in the South China Sea, but it's also a very good reflection of the role that India wants to play in the Indo-Pacific.
so the Quad summit just got over in Tokyo. How was it received in the Philippines?
Well, we're not part of the Quad, so we don't really figure. A lot of the discourses don't really figure much in Philippine society. But again, what's crucial here is that the Philippines has a long-standing military alliance with the United States. So,
Yes.
as long as that alliance remains, then we would still continue what we have started in terms of institutional linkages, joint military exercises with the United States.
Just going back a bit, I recall 30 years ago during the uprising against President Marcos, the role of the Catholic Church. Is the church as strong, as influential today as it was then?
Like I said, Filipinos are a rather conservative people, so a lot of us still still look to the church, and the church continues to enjoy a central role in Philippine society. But there are also different facets, different aspects, different groups, different religious groups, really, and they provide support to different candidates. So, for instance, a religious sect. A religious grouping, we call it Iglesia ni Cristo, um, openly supported President Marcos' candidacy and told all of its followers to vote for President Marcos. Yeah, so that being the case, the church still does play a very significant role, a central role in Philippine society. Whether or not the church will play or initiate being, the opposition and openly criticize the government, as it did in the 1980s to oust Marcos the father, that remains to be seen today.
So, last question. Again, I'm coming back to the India Philippines thing. What is it that you would expect to see on this relationship?
Sorry, again.
On the India Philippines relationship going forward, what is it that you would like to see?
I would like to see a continuation of the non-military aspects of the relationship. This is something that can be part of the Philippines' pursuit of an independent foreign policy. Not so much. Not to trivialize the importance of the military aspect, but as a country that constantly experiences natural disasters, dependence on the digital economy. These are things that oftentimes fly under the radar, but they are nonetheless important for the everyday lives of Filipinos. So I think I would like to see a continuation of these different aspects of India-Philippine relations.
On that note, Charmaine Willoughby, thank you very much. Very interesting and great insight. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much as well.
And for those of you who have joined us on this conversation, thank you for your comments and observations. And do continue to follow us in future such chats. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter. Thank you and good night.